All right, let's do this. So first of all, thank you for attending this session. I know it's getting later in the day, so really appreciate your attendance here. But my colleague and I are going to, my colleague Powell and I are going to take you through the new features from AWS Mobile Services. And yeah, let's just keep it here for 1 second. So basically, there's 3 new services that we're going to touch. The first is Cognito, and specifically, we're going to cover the Your User Pools feature there. Number 2 is the global SMS feature that's part of Amazon's Simple Notification Service. And then third and finally, we will cover the new remote access feature from AWS Device Farm. So a couple things before we dive right in, just a couple quick reminders. First of all, this deck will be published to the AWS SlideShare after this event. And number 2, please do fill out those speaker evaluations. Those are going to help us continue to improve the presentation. So that aside, let's dive right in. So where we're going to start is we're going to talk about the new Your User Pools feature that was introduced about 2 weeks ago in GA for Amazon Cognito. And specifically, the story starts with this notion that building auth infrastructure for your applications is actually a pretty difficult and complicated process. So first of all, you have to stand up a user directory to manage your users. Managing the user data and the user passwords in particular in a secure manner is a very complicated process. Number 3, scalability of the app is often an afterthought. You want to get your functionality, your core functionality out the door as quickly as possible, and making sure that your auth infrastructure is scalable for your eventual needs is just not worth the time to spend up front. In those, just a quick note, we're still, I don't know why the slides are moving, just stay right here for just a second. So in those business-to-consumer use cases, when you're integrating multiple third-party social identities, that's a lot of heavy lifting that you also don't want to invest time in. And finally, in those enterprise use cases where you're building mobile applications for your employees, for example, integrating with those enterprise identity providers, for example, SAML-based identities like Active Directory, that's, again, additional heavy lifting that you really don't want to invest the time in. So that's where Amazon Cognito Identity comes into play. And taking a step back, I just want to walk through a typical user experience when it comes to auth. So up front, you have the registration process. Pretty simple stuff. Your users register for your application. They provide specific data. You capture it. You store it, right? So that's the registration piece. Then you have the sign-in piece, where your user comes back with credentials, and you verify that that is who the user is, and that's the sign-in piece. You can also here implement sign-in with third-party identity providers like Facebook for your social identities, and then those consumer use cases. You can also implement third-party enterprise identities like Active Directory. So that's that middle part, the authentication piece of the equation. And then finally, you have the access control, right? The authorization layer, which essentially gives the specific access privileges to the user based on their attributes. So quickly, again, I don't know why this is happening, but I think we're getting too excited. It's good. So in terms of what we've launched, 2 weeks ago, we launched the Your User Pools feature, and that covers the registration piece of the equation and the sign-in piece of the equation. And those are your own identities that are specific to your application. Now, we also have this existing functionality, which was called federated identities for Cognito, and that enables those third-party identity use cases. So that's one piece of the existing functionality. In addition, what federated identities provides is an access control functionality as well. that's built on top of AWS's identity and access management infrastructure. So there's the federated identities with third-party identity providers for the authentication, and then there's the access control layer. So now moving on, I want to demonstrate how this all comes together. So on the left-hand side, basically you have a variety of different options in terms of the authentication layer. You can use a variety of different social identity providers. You can have identities that are specific to your application, and that's through that new Your User Pools feature. And then you can also enable signing in with enterprise identities. Now, if you move to the right-hand side, there you see the access control story. The first piece is what I mentioned that is available within federated identities, that ability to broker access to AWS resources using AWS Identity and Access Management. And that's built in within Cognito. The second access control story there is for your own APIs that are fronted by API Gateway. And Cognito is integrated with API Gateway to essentially make that happen. And then finally, you have a data synchronization piece. And this is to manage user data across multiple different user devices using the cloud. A quick note here, and to take a step back, I want to stress that identity is often not implemented in a channel-specific manner. You don't have user identities specifically for your mobile channel. You don't have user identities specifically for your web channel. So this solution is not just a mobile solution, it's a comprehensive identity solution that's meant to work for your web applications and your mobile applications. So moving forward, now I want to double-click into essentially the Your User Pools feature. Again, this is the feature that we launched 2 weeks ago in GA, and there's 3 high-level takeaways here. The first is the serverless user authentication and user management functionality. Essentially, you can implement these flows for authentication and admin flows for managing your users and adjusting their attributes all in a serverless manner. So that's the first key point. The second key point is underlying the solution is a highly scalable user directory. And that can scale to hundreds of millions of users. The third point here is that what we're trying to do with this solution is actually productize and externalize many of the best practices AWS uses for application development to our customers. So you'll see enhanced security features that you can implement in your own application, like phone number verification, or email verification, or multi-factor authentication. And we'll go into those in just a second. So here, just one second. Here, I want to talk about the comprehensive user flows that we've implemented. So again, going back to those 3 areas of the user experience. In the first area and the second area, the registration and sign-in, we provide those flows. Those are table stakes. You can allow your user to sign up and then sign in with just their email or password, with their username and password, or their phone number and password. You can collect whatever attribute data in that context as well. So those are basic. In addition, we provide a lot of rich functionality in terms of the user profile data. You can capture what user profile data you require. You can create custom attributes in that context as well. So you want to capture data that's specific to your application or your specific business use case. And within the context of the application, you can allow your users to adjust and view that data as well. Now, the third piece here is email and phone number verification. So to dive a little bit deeper into that, we provide flows that allow you to verify that the email address or the phone number that you're providing, that your user is providing for registering to your application is actually valid. And basically, we send a one-time password to the email or phone number provided, and the user must complete that challenge and enter that one-time password in the registration flow in order to complete that registration flow and complete that process in its entirety. We also provide a flow for forget password, if the user forgets their password. And also, we support a flow for multi-factor authentication, and that's SMS-based multi-factor authentication, which during that middle phase where the user signs in, we actually prompt them with another challenge where we send a one-time password via SMS, and they must input that in addition to their password. Now, one of the interesting things here is, those are table stakes functionalities, but what we also allow you to do here is customize any of these flows with integrations with Lambda. So let me dive a little bit deeper into that. So here we have basically these Lambda hooks that are positioned at different points in these flows. So let's take authentication, for example. When you're about to sign in, the user of your application inputs their credentials. And before those credentials are sent to the back end and verified, you can execute a Lambda function at that point to customize the flow based on your business requirements. And what you would do there is you could run some additional validation at that point to gate your sign-in. In addition, after the authentication is completed, you can also execute a Lambda function at that point. So the user is verified, their credentials check out, and now you can do some custom event logging or some custom analytics. So moving from the authentication to the sign up, in the similar fashion, when the user presents their data and before the user is created, you can execute a pre-sign-up authentication hook. And that as a pre-sign-up authentication hook, and basically that allows you to do, again, additional types of validations. For example, if you want to check if the email is valid according to some back-end user directory. In addition, after the confirmation, you can execute another Lambda hook. So that's the post-confirmation Lambda hook. And again, that's a way to, once the user is created, once they are confirmed, you can execute some custom logic to essentially allow the user to get a welcome message that is unique to them, or again, for these custom event logging or analytics types of use cases. And then finally, the fifth Lambda hook that I want to discuss here is related to custom messages. And these are related to the messages that you send for email verification or phone number verification or SMS-based MFA. Those are the messages that we're talking about. Now, you can customize those messages in a static manner, meaning you can change the HTML, you can change the language, but every single one of your users is going to receive that same templated message. Now, what this Lambda hook allows you to do is essentially make it custom on a dynamic basis. So if your user's from Japan, you can target the language, you can write it in Japanese characters and send that message for, say, an email verification message. In a similar way, you can change it to French, et cetera. So it serves that localization use case and general other types of dynamic customization use cases. So moving forward, one of the features along those lines that we introduced with the GA launch, and that extends this ability to use Lambda to customize your flows, is this custom auth flow. So we've talked about before and after the sign-in event, where the user presents their credentials to sign into your application. Now you can actually also customize the actual authentication event. And from a tactical perspective, what this allows you to do is essentially add custom challenges in band to that authentication event. So say you have a business requirement to add a CAPTCHA challenge to make sure that bots aren't signing into your application. You can use this flow to implement that CAPTCHA challenge. Say you have a specific second factor challenge that you want to implement that's specific to your business requirements. Again, you can implement that custom second factor challenge in the context of this custom auth flow. And what that allows Cognito to do is to gate access based on successful completion of that custom challenge. So again, another way to customize the auth flow in a serverless manner using Lambda. So moving on, I want to quickly touch on these admin capabilities. And I'll cover these actually more in depth during the demo. But at a high level, you have your creating the user pool. Within the user pool, you can collect certain attribute data for those users. And then you have essentially managing and searching the users on the back end once your pool is created and you have an application that's leveraging that. So in terms of creating your user pools, you can create multiple user pools across multiple AWS regions. And today, we support 4 different regions. We support 2 North American regions, one being Oregon, the second being Northern Virginia. We support 1 APAC region being Tokyo, and we support 1 European region being Dublin. Now, in terms of the attribute data, you can define custom attributes. And this, again, is according to your specific business requirements. You can require the submission of certain attributes. So you can gate the registration process on the user inputting a specific attribute. In addition, we have this set per app permissions concept. Now, you're essentially allowed to create multiple apps against 1 user pool. What that essentially allows you to do is you can allow your users to sign in with the same credentials to each one of those apps, because on the back end, there's just 1 user pool. Now, what the set per app permissions allows you to do is you can enable some of those attributes to be writable by only a subset of those applications that are using the user pool. So you could have a membership status custom attribute, for example, that only certain applications can write to. Now we have the ability to set up password policies. You can require certain aspects of your, you can require certain aspects in the password that your users create. That's a security function, so you can require certain characters or length, etc. And then finally, once the user pool is created, you can manage your users, so you can globally sign them out, you can delete them, etc. And then you can search those users within the context of the user pool. So moving on, one of the other features that we launched as part of the GA was this remembered device feature. And where this originated was that we heard feedback from developers along the lines of, how do I reduce friction for my users in the context of multi-factor authentication? My users have to input the second factor challenge on every single sign-in event, and I want to reduce that friction. Number 2, basically they wanted a way to associate devices that their users are signing in with to that user. So from that perspective, we introduced this functionality that allows you to remember the devices that your users use and associate that to the user in the context of the user pools feature from Cognito. Next, I want to cover the integration with API Gateway. And this, again, is a part of the access control authorization story. There's 2 integration points with API Gateway. The first is this custom authorizer function, which is essentially a Lambda function that the API Gateway executes. It takes in the identity token, so which is a bearer token, and it provides specific attributes. It uses the attributes to essentially provide specific access. And that's code and logic that you develop, but you put it in the Lambda function, and it essentially allows you to create a very granular and fine-grained access control layer. As part of the GA, we also launched native support for user pools in API Gateway. And this essentially allows user pools to do not just the authentication, but also the authorization. So once user pools verifies the identity of the user will get access to all the API endpoints that are fronted by API Gateway. So that's the close of the feature discussion. I want to quickly address some of the feedback that we received from some of our customers during the beta period. So we had a public beta, which we launched for about, that we ran for about 3 months. And we had significant participation. In particular, I want to call out 2 use cases that are particularly relevant to the usefulness of the feature. The first being Hixme. Hixme is a Series A startup that's funded by Kleiner Perkins in the healthcare space, and they wanted to build an entirely serverless stack. And they needed an authentication solution that they could just plug in. And they used Cognito user pools to essentially move quickly, develop their application in a serverless manner, and essentially were able to plug in that authentication functionality without investing a lot of time there. The second customer I want to call out is Asurion, which is a global insurer of high-value electronics. Essentially, they serve as the white label insurance provider under many mobile network operators to provide insurance for your phone. So they're a very large business. They have a very large number of users. And they were looking for an authentication solution that was highly scalable. And that's why they came to Cognito. So I'll leave it at that, and I want to quickly dive into the demo. Let's see. And there's two aspects of this demo. The first thing I'm going to walk through is basically setting up a user pool. So that's from the admin perspective, and we recommend using the console, the AWS console, to set that up. So let's start from the main AWS screen here, and we would navigate to Cognito, and then we would say manage your user pools. So fortunately, I've already prepped a user pool for this demo, but I want to create a user pool just to walk through the experience very quickly. So where I want to start here is first, obviously we want to create a name. So I'll create a demo pool for NYC. And what I want to do here then is there's two options. So I can just review the defaults and just push out the pool, but I want to walk through the step through the settings. The first area here is the attributes. What data do you want to capture from your users? Now, every user pool is created with the OpenID Connect Spec attributes. So these are those attributes right here. So every user pool will have those attributes by default. Now, you have some optionality in terms of requiring those attributes. So again, you can require the user to input those attributes in order to complete the registration process. So if I make, for example, birth date required, the user would have to input a birth date field in order to complete the registration process. Secondly, we have this aliasing functionality. And what aliasing allows you to do is often case you see sites that allow users to sign in just with an email address and password. So the aliasing feature essentially allows you to implement that similar type of sign-in experience. So when I click the checkbox for alias for email, that essentially allows my users to just submit the email address and the password for them to sign on from there on out. So here, I want to talk about custom attributes. So you can create up to 20 custom attributes. And basically, for example, here I want to do a membership status for my application. I can choose the min-max length, and that's for strings. And I also have the option to make it a number. So we'll move forward to the next phase of the password policy. So here, you can decide what types of passwords that your users can use in the context of your user pool. And we default to this relatively complex password to ensure the strength is highest, but you can kind of configure those to your business requirements. So you can require numbers in your passwords, or special characters, or upper and lowercase characters. So we'll leave this, and we'll continue to verifications. Now there's three types of verifications here. We have the multi-factor authentication, we have the email verification, and then we have the phone number verification. So here, with regards to multi-factor authentication, you can essentially choose required or optional when you enable it. So you can require all your users of your application to sign in with multi-factor authentication so they don't really have a choice. Or you can have this opt-in model where you allow your users to opt in to using multi-factor authentication if they want to secure their application with that extra layer of security. We also have do you want to require verifications of emails or phone numbers. So you can either do one or the other. You can require that the email is verified during the sign up. You can require that the phone number is verified during the sign-up. And again, that essentially kicks off, it sends a one-time password to the email or the phone number. The user will have to complete that challenge by taking that one-time password and inputting it during the registration flow. And that's a way to ensure that the email address or the phone number provided are actually valid. Here, in addition, you can customize the text or the HTML of your message. And if you are using email verification, you can use a custom from address and a custom reply to address. So that, again, allows you to fully customize this solution so that it's really your infrastructure. So we will say, I want to show one quick thing. I want to do a phone number verification. Now, and we'll go into this in a little bit more depth in the next feature that we're going to cover with SMS. But this feature is built on top of, it's using simple notification services, global SMS features. So in order to enable that, we're creating this rule to essentially allow us to send SMS messages on your behalf. So we'll move forward to the next slide, or next phase of the setup experience. And this is to create this remembering device functionality, to enable it. So you have two options in terms of initially setting up. You can remember all of your users' devices, and that's this always option. Or you can allow the user to opt in to having their remembered devices. So when we select either one of these, you'll see another configuration option presented to you. And what this next configuration option allows you to do is to use this remembered device as a substitute for that second factor challenge, so where we send a one-time password to the phone and the user has to complete that during the sign-in event. So what it's doing is it's suppressing that second factor challenge, and you can essentially, that's a way to limit the friction that the user experiences. So they don't have to do two things on every sign-up, but you're still ensuring a higher degree of security. Now, we'll move forward to the next step, which is this notion of apps. And basically, as I mentioned before, you can have multiple different apps that use the same user pool. And again, what that allows you to do is it allows your users to essentially use their same credentials across those different apps. Here, we will add an app, and we'll call it something like Big Apple. And here, you can configure the length of the refresh token. And I want to dive a bit deeper here just for a moment. So as part of the authentication process, what Cognito vends, it vends three types of tokens. One is an OpenID Connect Spec identity token, which is a bearer token. It also vends two OAuth tokens, one being an access and refresh token. How those typically work is you have the access token, which is fixed at an hour's length, and then you have the refresh token, which you use to refresh the access essentially there. And that refresh token is configurable on an app-by-app basis. So what this essentially allows you to do is say if I make this 14. When my user signs in, they will not have to provide their credentials and sign in again for 14 days. So that's what that essentially means from a tactical standpoint. Now, I can generate a client secret on a per-app basis. This is for calling the backend. And also, I want to quickly call this out right here, that we use two ways of authenticating users. You have an option to use the Secure Remote Password Protocol, which is SRP, which essentially allows users to authenticate without their password passing in plain text across the wire. So basically, that protocol leverages a derivative of the password, and that derivative, that verifier, is what is used to actually authenticate the user. And that's toggled on or off here. So basically, if you select this, you can also enable a way where the user credentials are posted, and basically you authenticate the user using those credentials. If you leave this unchecked, basically you are only allowing the use of SRP in the context of your authentication. So we'll create this app, and then we will move to the next step. Here are those Lambda triggers that I discussed. And you can essentially create a Lambda trigger. You can create a Lambda function in the Lambda console, and then you can select that trigger here from these drop-down menus. And as I mentioned, there's the pre-sign-up, pre-authentication, custom message, post-authentication, and post-confirmation triggers. Those were the 5 that we discussed. Now, these additional 3 Lambda triggers are meant for that custom auth flow. So again, where we're using Lambda to customize the actual authentication flow. So we'll move to the next step, and we'll review this. And we can create the pool. So now you're ready to go. I've already prepped a pool for our case, so I will go back here. I have this new NYC Summit demo pool. But I did want to bring up the sample application, and this is available on our GitHub repository. So you can use this to kind of play around with the feature and understand how it works. So I highly recommend using it. But I want to sign up with a new user here very quickly. And I'm going to call him example user. And I'm going to create a password. Again, I had pretty stringent password policies, so I do need to adhere to that. Name him Sam. And I'm going to use a random phone number here. I've hardwired it on the back end to actually send to my actual phone number. So we will kind of enter that, and now I'm going to sign up. Oh no, it looks like I created too many users. We'll make this guy 1. And now I will sign up, and bam. So I'm going to get a confirmation code. So this comes to my phone. Hopefully the network, yes, there we go. So I am going to complete the sign-up process here. And I'm going to yes, so I've been confirmed. Now let's sign in. So there we go. So my password's there, and now I have to pass the multi-factor authentication challenge here. So here I get another code by SMS, and it is 4611. And voila, I'm signed in. So that's the feature in a nutshell. I'll be around for some questions at the end. But now I want to move back to the slide deck and cover the next feature, which is the global SMS feature of Amazon Simple Notification Service. So again, a quick aside, the Cognito user pools features does use this global SMS feature to send those SMS messages for phone number verification or multi-factor authentication. So that aside, let's jump into the current capabilities of Amazon SNS. So Amazon SNS is a publish and subscribe based messaging service that handles billions of messages on a daily basis. And there's 3 high-level takeaways here. So you can send messages to any device or endpoint. This is at global scale, and it's highly performant. And there's support for multiple different frameworks and platforms. And so what that means is you can have you have those server-side SDKs that are available through the AWS SDK. We also have higher-level client-side SDKs for Android and iOS, for example, that are available through the AWS Mobile SDK. A quick note here also, SNS has had SMS functionality previously, but there were a couple of caveats there. It was only supported for US mobile numbers, and it operated under this framework of explicit opt-in. And we'll cover how this new feature is different than what had existed before. But where this all starts is I want to cover just quickly the SMS market and some of the issues present there. So why is SMS still popular? SMS are mobile phone number based, and mobile phone numbers are universally addressable. You can reach a person regardless of the geography, the network carrier, or the time zone. They're also a strong identity mechanism. Basically, they often require a government identity check. And finally, they're very ubiquitous. 4.77 billion mobile phones across a total population of 7.3 billion. So that aside, let's move into some of the issues faced in this with regards to SMS. So one of the core issues here is that SMS lacks quality of service intelligence. In most cases, you don't get end-to-end delivery acknowledgement with SMS. And this is unlike TCP or IP. The SMS delivery receipts often provide just a success or failure response until just the next hop. Moreover, legacy telcos operate this least cost routing. So essentially, that means that often there's more hops than optimal, and often those hops have lackluster deliverability. And what that means for your user experience is that's increased latency and reduced deliverability. So that adds some friction to the user experience. Now, addressing this issue is not easy, right? There's over 2,000 telecom operators spread across over 200 countries and territories. And even in that case, one-hops are not necessarily all reliable. Sometimes a carrier-to-carrier interconnect can be more reliable than a direct connect. And moreover, with this geographic distribution, there's different regulations across countries, and the penalties are relatively stiff there. So that's the problem. Let's move into the new global SMS feature. Specifically, you'll see some of the deltas between what was previously existing and what's available now. So now this feature covers over 200 destination countries and territories, and that means connectivity with over 1,100 telecom carriers. Now we've moved from this default opt-in model. So we moved from, this explicit opt-in model to this default opt-in model to support those one-time password and multi-factor authentication use cases. We also optimize the treatment of each traffic type, right? So transactional routes, which are meant for those MFA and one-time password types of scenarios, those are optimized for deliverability. Whereas marketing messages are optimized for cost. We also have implemented cost control functionality within the context of this feature, so you can set per message price thresholds, and you can set account level cost thresholds. In addition, this only supports outbound messaging. There is an exception. The only exception is where law requires. We support opt-out and help inbound message processing. So moving forward, one of the features that I really want to highlight here is this adaptive routing, which essentially picks the best route for a message based on historical deliverability information. So in this case, you'll see essentially there's 4 potential routes. The message will be sent through that second route, essentially because it has the highest historical deliverability, 99%. And that's based on historical data, and it's regardless of the number of hops. It optimized for deliverability in that scenario. So moving forward, I want to call out some of the additional features of this new launch. Essentially, we support alphanumeric sender IDs where it is supported, and so that's most European countries. We also provide detailed usage statistics. You can essentially identify an S3 bucket, and then we'll save and load those usage statistics into that S3 bucket. We also have this notion of sticky sender IDs. So in the context of SMS in the US, we have a pool of numbers that we use to send messages on your behalf. And what we do with the sticky sender ID is we will send messages from the same phone number on behalf of your application to a specific user. So that user is not seeing messages on behalf of your application, for example, from multiple different numbers. They're only seeing one number. So it reduces some of the friction there. In addition, we have this per message delivery status. So these are pushed out. These statuses are pushed out to CloudWatch logs. And they include metadata like the to, the from, as well as the price. And then finally, we have these deliverability statistics, which are on a per account, provided on a per account level and a per traffic type basis. One of the other features that I wanted to call out specifically was the addressing of these local restrictions. So we pull a lot of this heavy lifting away from you, right? So for example, in France, an SMS can't originate from a standard number. So we provision a delivery code on your behalf, and we send all messages in France using that delivery code. In Brazil, the character limit is actually 157 characters. And that's actually differs from the global standard of 160 characters. So what we do is we actually we break at word breaks. We break the message up at specific word junctures, and we send us separate messages, and then we concatenate those messages for phones that support that concatenation functionality. So it comes out as one message from that perspective. India has several regulations. For example, you can't send promotional messages from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. So we will buffer those messages until that window elapses. And then finally, transactional messages in India can only be sent from a pre-registered communication code. So we will only send messages from one that we provisioned on your behalf. So we essentially resolve some of those issues that come up with the local regulations on your behalf. So where I want to close essentially with SMS, the SMS feature is these console experiences that we've enabled for you. So first here you can see this is the primary dashboard that provides deliverability statistics on a promotional or transactional basis. In addition, you have significant configuration options. So for example, you can choose your default message type. You can also essentially dictate your spend amount at an account level. So that's the feature that we had discussed. You can create those cost thresholds. And here you can set a specific sender ID. And then finally, we provide a dashboard that allows you to essentially manage the phone numbers and the users that have opted out from receiving messages from you. So with that, I'll close out the discussion about global SMS, and I will hand it off to my colleague, Powell, for Device Farm.
Hello, everyone. Let me just get this plugged in. And we can get started. So, just a few words about Device Farm. We actually launched the service last year here during New York Summit. That was, I think, July 7th. This is when we announced. And when we first launched Device Farm essentially allowed mobile developers to test their apps on real Android and iOS devices that are hosted in our data center. Right? That was that's the premise of the service. And initially, Device Farm supported just automated testing. So you could essentially upload your test package to us, select devices, upload your app, hit go, and you would start seeing results for your tests reported on these different devices and structured in a report that is easy to browse, contains screenshots, performance data, and so on. Since then, we heard a lot of customer feedback around manual testing. Essentially, what's about manual testing? We don't have time to do automation yet, or we're still maybe 50-50. We do some automation, but we still do manual testing for things like exploratory testing. And we decided to do something about it, and we launched something called Remote Access. And Remote Access just launched last month. We had a feature in public beta for Android only since April, but last month is when we added iOS and we removed the beta badge. And I'll be happy to show this feature in action to you. This feature is, just to move back, the feature is very, very straightforward to use and doesn't take a lot of time to explain. Essentially, you pick a device, and within minutes you'll see a screen of the device within your browser, and then you can interact with the screen of the device using your browser. You can perform various types of touches. You can use the device's keyboard. You can upload your own apps and install them on that device if you want to test your own applications. And then once the session is over, you will be able to review and share the logs, complete logs from that session, including things like Logcat for Android, syslog for iOS, as well as a complete video capture. And without further ado, let's actually jump to a demo. If we could switch to my computer, that will be helpful. All right, so device farm, when you're in AWS console, device farm is right here under mobile services. And if you go to a device farm, and if you jump into a project where we can actually create a new project, NYC Summit Demo 1. If I create a new project, I can go to this project, and I have two options here. Before, it was just automated tests. Now we also have remote access available. And if you go to remote access, you can just hit this button, start a new session, in order to select your device and get a session going. So a list of devices can be seen here. You can filter this list. For instance, I can look for someone like, I want a Galaxy S3 Mini, for instance. So I pick a device from this list. I can name the session in any way that I want. It might be very useful if you're maybe running actual manual tests, and then for different manual tests you can name your sessions after names of your tests. So later on, if you're reviewing suspicious results, you have a clear record of what happened. Or maybe you're reproducing customer problem that was reported from the field, so I can rename the session Customer Issue Repro on Samsung Galaxy S3 Mini. And once I hit this button, confirm and start session, we're going to wait until device of that kind becomes available, which generally is under a minute. In most cases, it's immediate, but internal SLA is under a minute. Once this device is acquired, and it just happened a few seconds ago, we're going to set it up and start your remote session. Setup itself may take between 30 to 90 seconds, depending on the type of a device, and it includes various cleanup and reset operations. Things like making sure the device is on home screen, making sure that there are no pop-ups, making sure that we're connected to Wi-Fi, orientation is set properly, and so on. So we do all of these things, and we also install a little agent on a device, and depending on the speed of a device, this may vary and be sometime between 30 and 90 seconds. While we wait for this session, I already started a few sessions when I was sitting there, so I'll jump into these sessions so you can see how it looks. So this is a session that I created earlier for Android on Galaxy S4. Here is a session that I created for one of the Apple devices, Apple iPad Mini 2. The experience is pretty much exactly the same, a few differences. I'll try to highlight them later on. But like I said, you can swipe through the screen. You can open any app. I can go here to apps and swipe through the apps over here. Of course, you can install any application that you want as well. So, for instance, let me install IMDb application. So I already uploaded earlier, but if I wanted to upload a new APK, I could do it from here too. I can just pick an APK and just upload it. It's just a little faster if it's already uploaded in our internal S3 bucket. And once I pick an application to install, it should appear here in the apps list on this particular device soon. So here it is, IMDb. And now, of course, I can open this application and play with it. So I can do search, and I can search for something like John Carter. And I can use either my keyboard over here, my laptop keyboard, or I can use the actual keyboard on the device itself, right? So which might be interesting and important when you do localization testing. You might want to actually see what kind of keyboard, what kind of keyboard will be present on the actual device. And of course you can go into settings and change any settings on the device if you'd like to, for instance, change type of keyboard, things like type of autocomplete and so on. So yeah, the experience is pretty much the same as if you were interacting with a device locally. I can change, I can also change the orientation here, so I can go between landscape and portrait. And if device doesn't have software buttons for home, back, and recent apps, you can use these buttons here to control it. If I go to the browser, of course you can do browser testing. Let me show you, how the landscape versus portrait works. So now I can try to flip to landscape, and we are now testing this device in landscape. And if I go back home, of course, Android's home is always in portrait. It will flip back automatically. Pretty much the same experience works on iOS. I can also do swipes. And the only difference between iOS and Android is that on Android, the actual swipes are processed while I'm still swiping. On iOS, we need to complete the event in order to pass it to a device. So nothing will be actually passed to a device until I'm done with my swipe operation. But other than that, experience is the same. So I can open a browser, and I can, of course, go to any site and so on and so on. So once I'm done with this session, by the way, let's take a look here. So this is my third session that I just created. So this was the session for Galaxy S3 Mini. And you can see that this session is now ready, and it's going to work in the exactly same way as the other sessions that I showed you. If you actually stop this session, once we're done with the device cleanup, once we're done with removing all of the data that you put on a device, you will be able to see a full log of the session, including device log as well as video capture. And let's actually look at some of the previous sessions here. So if I go to remote access, I can see a history of my sessions here. And for instance, here on Galaxy S4 T-Mobile, I had a short session here. It's now loading all of the logs. If the session was long, and I believe that the session was like 1 hour long, this was during my previous session, it's going to take a while in order to load all of the logs. In the meantime, I can go to Files tab and either download a pure logcat, like unprocessed file, or download a video capture. As you can see, I've got a video capture being downloaded right now, and I can launch it in QuickTime and just get started. This session was sitting idle for most of the time, so I'm just going to fast forward here towards the end. Maybe it was actually sitting idle for the full hour. You can only see the clock moving. So yeah, this session, probably nothing really happened in the middle of this session. It was just sitting idle for 1 hour. Let me try to find something that actually has something more interesting. And by the way, here are the logs that I mentioned. So this is a log view that shows you all of the logs from this session. If I remove this filter, you'll see that it contains all of the logcat entries and so on and so on. And similarly, on the iOS side, it will contain all of the syslog entries. Just before we actually maybe the session that I just demoed minutes ago should be already done. Oh, this guy. No, it's still tearing it down. Let me try to find a different one so I can show you some video that shows something happening on a device. Let me go here to this session, files, video. Well, this one was also a fairly long session, 14 megs of a video capture. In the meantime, let me go to a different project. All right, so this one is done as well. So this was the session that we just did before. And you can see there are 3 videos because I flipped orientation. Today we don't do any stitching. This is something that we want to do in the future. But today, every time we flip orientation, you'll get a break in the video. So here, if I download this one, it should be a short video from that browser session. And if I download the last video right here, it should show me the reminder of the session, or maybe the beginning of the session. Yeah, okay, so here you can see me playing with IMDb application. So you get essentially full record, both video and as well as complete logs from the session. And needless to say that if you use device farm automation feature, you'll pretty much see same results and even more, right? Because when we run automated tests, you also get performance data, you also get actual test logs and so on. So, but there's a high degree of parity between these two features. And this is it for today's demo. And if you'd like to see more of device farm in action, I do have a demo at the demo booth at 6:20 p.m. today, and I'll be demoing not just this, but also automation. So if you'd like to see more about automation, please come and see me later on. If you have any questions right now, please join us off stage for a few minutes. Please, thanks a lot for attending. Please complete your survey and use our services. Thank you.